yesterday's attacks and other things.
Some say that he does have ties to Muslim extremists. I don't know.
A few months after the Russia-Ukraine conflict flared up, Moscow has now taken around 20% of Ukrainian territory as fierce fighting rages on in the eastern Donbass region. After a long battle, Ukrainian forces have been forced to retreat from the city of Severodonetsk, one of the few remaining strongholds in the key Luhansk region. The snapshot of the war is in contrast to what the West hoped to unfold. With such advances, coupled with backfiring sanctions imposed on Moscow, the Russians are practically winning the war on and off the battlefield, all to the dismay of Western leaders. Less than a month ago, Western leaders patted themselves on the back for what they called humiliating failure for Russia when the Russian military was performing badly.
Putin darf seinen Krieg nicht gewinnen. Und ich bin überzeugt, wird ihn nicht gewinnen. Schon jetzt hat alle seine strategischen Ziele verfehlt. Eine Einnahme der gesamten Ukraine durch Russland scheint heute weiter entfernt als noch zu Beginn des Krieges, auch dank des beeindruckenden Abwehrkampfes der ukrainischen Armee und Bevölkerung.
Western analysts compared Putin's government to that of the Soviet Union. Some even suggested Putin was almost falling victim to a terminal disease. American diplomats called the war a strategic failure for Russia.
We have said for months that we intend to make this invasion a strategic failure for Russia. They have endured tactical defeats on the battlefield. They have lost the battle for Kyiv. They have lost a large number of Russian service members, Russian equipment. You look at Russia's economy, Russia's financial system. They are well on the path to strategic defeat.
Vladimirovich Putin.
Whereas the West has been trying to depict Putin as an aggressive politician seeking to occupy or annex Ukraine, the Russian president's major goals in this war have never been taking parts of Ukraine. Rather, he's been seeking to destroy what he calls an anti-Russia project and to stop the country from joining NATO, which means to stop the West from using Ukraine as a bridgehead for anti-Russian geopolitical activities. In this sense, Putin has already won the war, as Ukraine has dismissed the idea of joining the organization. Russia now needs to maintain its military presence in Ukraine for a longer period of time just to safeguard its achievement. It doesn't need any major territorial gains like taking Ukraine's capital city. The Kremlin sees its neighbor as an anti-Russian weapon in Western hands, and therefore considers itself to be locked in a battle with the West, albeit on Ukrainian soil. The war will probably continue until the West changes its approach towards Russia. Above all, Washington's carelessness for Russian geopolitical concerns. After all, the war broke out after Putin couldn't bring the West into a dialogue about Moscow's concerns.
Что западные партнеры обостряют ситуацию поставками Киеву летального современного вооружения, проведением провокационных военных маневров в Черном море, да и не только в Черном, и в других регионах, близких к нашим границам. А что касается Черного моря, то последнее, это вообще выходит за определенные рамки. Но на расстоянии 20 километров от нашей государственной границы летают стратегические бомбардировщики. Они, как известно, несут очень серьезное оружие. Партнеры наши очень своеобразные и так, как бы сказать, помягче, поверхностно очень относятся ко всем нашим предостережениям и к разговорам о красных линиях.
In the words of Tatiana Stanovaya, founder of the Paris-based think tank Realpolitik, for Putin, the most important aim was to shake the world order to demonstrate the U.S. as the leader of the collective West, that the world will never be as it was before, and that Russia can impose its own rules. By many credible accounts, Ukraine is losing 100 to 200 soldiers each day. According to Jeffrey Edmonds of the Center for Naval Analyses, they're losing much more than they were in the early days of the war, because it's much more of a conventional war with artillery duels. That really plays to Russia's strength. Even Biden's top advisors have acknowledged that Moscow has the upper hand. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recently said the numbers clearly favor the Russians. They outgun and outrange. Yet Putin's victories are not confined to the battlefield alone. The most obvious one is how the war has damaged the economies of his enemies. Stock markets are down, interest rates are up, inflation is soaring, as are gas prices. In short, the war has popped the pandemic recovery bubble.
Today's inflation report confirmed what Americans already know. Putin's price hike is hitting America hard. Gas prices at the pump, energy and food prices account for half of the monthly price increases since May. Inflation outside of energy and food, what the economists call core inflation, moderated the last 2 months. Not enough, but it moderated, it's come down. And we needed to come down much more quickly.
At the same time, what Washington carefully knitted together in the early days of the war is fraying. For example, two members of NATO, namely Turkey and Hungary, have refrained from accepting any key initiatives for isolating Russia.
Hepsinden öte gerek siyasi, gerek askeri, gerek ekonomik, gerek ticari alanlarda Türkiye-Rusya ilişkileri hakikaten çok farklı bir şekilde kendini gösteriyor.
That's while France and Germany, two other NATO members, are seriously seeking to negotiate with Moscow. Outside the Western alliance, opinions are even more divided over Russia. Much of Africa, for example, is unwilling to take a stand against Putin.
Мы считаем, что Африка в целом и отдельные государства, с которыми у нас традиционно очень добрые, без всякого преувеличения, дружеские отношения, что вся Африка в целом, она имеет огромные перспективы. И исходя именно из этого, намерены и дальше развивать наши отношения с Африкой в целом, с отдельными государствами.
Needless to say, China and even India, which is supposedly a U.S. partner, are reluctant to confront Putin. India's Minister of External Affairs said in early June, Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
应该说，人类社会现在还是遭遇着诸多的挑战、危机。在这个背景下呢，中俄两国坚守初心，始终保持双边关系的稳健前行，行而不辍，未来可期。我也愿意同普京总统先生一道，为新历史条件下的中俄关系规划蓝图定向领航。 推动两国高水平的互信源源不断转化为各领域的合作成果，切实造福两国人民。
Meanwhile, trade between China and Russia is expected to hit new records in the coming months, as China's president put it. The sanctions formulated to isolate Russia from the global financial system have so far failed to function, and the country's economy has been bolstered by the rising value of its energy exports. As for the Americans themselves, since the rising economic costs of the war are biting the country, there is no guarantee that the bipartisan consensus on Ukraine will last long. Likewise, an increase in food and fuel prices has led to the degradation of living standards in Europe. It seems that several rounds of EU sanctions on Russia have imposed more pain on the European countries than on Russia. Moscow says the West has failed to recognize the rise of new power blocs since the end of the Cold War, and it has to pay the price.
Соединенные Штаты, провозгласив победу в холодной войне, объявили себя посланниками Господа на земле, у которых нет никаких обязательств, а есть только интересы. Причем эти интересы объявляются священными. Они словно не замечают, что за последние десятилетия на планете сформировались и все громче заявляют о себе новые мощные центры. Каждый из них развивает свои политические системы и общественные институты, реализует собственные модели экономического роста и, конечно, имеет право на их защиту, на обеспечение национального суверенитета.
As the war rages on, things are getting more complicated for NATO and other Western allies of Ukraine. And regardless of the result of the war, global politics is very unlikely to be as it used to be.